God of War 3 probably has one of the best and most satisfying endings to any video game series in history. Zeus killed, Greece destroyed, and Kratos on death's door. Many people at the time were wondering if they'll ever actually see Kratos again. That question was answered with the next mainline entry, God of War Ascension. Thing is, Ascension served as a prequel to the series, and thus didn't answer the question of Kratos' fate. Couple this with the franchise fatigue from 7 games having come out within the span of a decade, and a mixed reception to Ascension and the other various spin-offs. Much like Kratos, the franchise was very much in limbo. God of War 3 ended Kratos' story in a very satisfying way, with no clear path ahead if they wanted to continue the franchise. Ending with 3 would have been a perfectly fine ending with the game series having wrapped itself up so nicely, but that all would change at E3 2016 with the reveal of God of War 2018. At this point, little was known about if the new game was going to be a sequel to God of War 3 or a complete reboot of the franchise in a new setting. All that people knew was that they would be seeing an older, more grizzled Kratos who now has an unnamed son, or as GameSpot says, Charlie, for whatever reason. The game was released to critical acclaim and earned itself Game of the Year, beating out titles such as Red Dead Redemption 2, Marvel's Spider-Man, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The game undoubtedly reignited interest in the God of War franchise and managed to get the series to where it is now. This game is almost a masterclass at narrative and game design for reasons that will become apparent later. As a warning, this video is a narrative and gameplay critique of God of War and will as such spoil the entire game. With warnings out of the way, this is God of War 2018. The game opens with a marked tree and a much older Kratos slightly behind it. The first thing the game has the player do is chop down a tree with R1. Kratos strikes the tree 4 times before fully taking it down on his 5th swing. This serves to reintroduce us back into Kratos' character after so long away from him. You can see that he's no longer the energetic and chaotic man he used to be in Greece, but it's also readily apparent that he is still harboring his rage inside. As he approaches the tree, his bandages on his arms start to fall off, prompting him to retighten them. For new fans, this can spark interest in Kratos' past life. For old fans, it brings a stark reminder of the life he used to live. Here enters Atreus, Kratos' son. Notice how Kratos turns away from him, quite literally turning his back on him when he reapplies his bandages. This very first scene sets up much of the themes that the rest of the game will tackle. Kratos' rage, past, and relationship with his son, all perfectly set up within 3 minutes of clicking play. I'm not going to go into every scene with this depth, only those that have significant themes or development in them. The boat ride back is the first proper conversation Kratos and Atreus share in the game. Atreus is talkative and youthful, while Kratos answers in very little words. In this game and the next, it's important to note that Kratos speaks in Laconic, which is a type of speech that seeks to be as concise as possible, which makes sense on 2 levels. His aversion to interactions, as well as the fact that Laconic hails from Laconia, the region of Greece Kratos is from. The rest of the walk back is draped in mystery, with the current situation being still somewhat unknown to the player. I'm gonna let the next scene play out when they reach the house.
Oh, there do I see my mother. Oh, there do I see my father. Oh, there do they call to me. 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 She's ready.
Find your way home. You are free.
It's revealed that Atreus' mother and Kratos' wife, Faye, has died, hence the tree being cut down for a funeral pyre. Notice how the warmth of the scene changes throughout. This scene is very much from Atreus' point of view, with the camera following him around for the majority of it. Atreus, seeing his mother's body, features warm tones and a colorful palette. However, when Kratos enters the scene, he is quite literally draped in shadows. As we will find later, he is essentially a complete stranger to Atreus. Faye is shown to be covered in light while his father in darkness. Kratos grabs Faye's body and lights the pyre for her. The first time we see any sort of paternal warmth is when Atreus burns his hand on his mother's knife, and Kratos applies snow to his burn to help it. While in the game, Kratos acts very cold and distant, his love for his son is always very clear through little moments like this. Atreus leaves the pyre, and we get this absolute gem of a line.
What are we hunting?
You are hunting deer.
Which way?
In the direction of deer.
Okay,
Which certainly won't come around to bite us in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. This tracking segment is the first time we really get to play as Kratos. We follow Atreus and get used to some of the traversal, namely jumping. We also get used to the Leviathan axe, and its ability to be thrown and recalled at will, which will serve a significant puzzle solving and combat function later on. Upon finding the deer and seeing Atreus' failure to kill it, Kratos starts yelling but soon calms himself after realizing what he's doing to his son. We also get this absolute amazing line of,
Do not be sorry. Be better.
Here we are introduced to combat and the Draugr enemy type for the first time. This game operates on a typical light-heavy attack system that many modern games use. Light for quicker attacks and heavy attacks for more damage or the chance to throw enemies into the air. This is one of the biggest departures from the original trilogy. You'll notice immediately that the camera is pulled slightly back of Kratos, and will stay that way for the entire time except for cutscenes. The hack and slash nature of the original trilogy is gone, leaning much more into strategy and slower movements. I personally like these changes to the game, as I was getting kind of bored of the combat in the last few games after playing them all back to back, and am kind of glad for the breath of fresh air. I know my beliefs aren't too popular within the God of War community, so there is also that. The axe also has a passive frost status effect, dealing more damage to fire types enemies and being able to slow down enemies once the frosted state is inflicted on them. Elemental types don't matter too much now, but they will later in the game. As previously mentioned, the axe also has the ability to be thrown and recalled at will. Obviously, there are several different combinations of light and heavy attacks that can be used with the axe. Kratos also has the ability to parry and block attacks, which do exactly what you would expect using the Guardian Shield. At this point, the parry just serves to stun nearby enemies, but later will unlock the ability to perform a powerful counter using the shield immediately following the parry. Combat at this point is kind of simplistic, with Kratos only being able to use a few attack strings and not having anything really too fancy. Draugr will act as our bog standard enemy for the rest of the game. These really aren't too hard to defeat and will never really be more than fodder type enemies, but they're good at least to get the player to learn some attack combinations. These Draugrs will pop up a lot early game, and by the time the story concludes in roughly 20 hours, you'll most likely be sick of them. And this is kind of because God of War has an issue with enemy variety, which is weird to say since in the past the series has never suffered from this issue. Many of the enemies you fight in this game, you fight over and over again, and it is going to get repetitive by the end. I'll touch on this in a bit more down the line, but keep this in mind. We also find our first heal stone in the room immediately next to us. These will serve as a primary form of healing and can be scavenged when sometimes killing enemies and found along the world. Health stones are a very interesting way of healing because it requires players to move to a specific spot on the field in order to pick them up, meaning that you can't get comfortable keeping your back to a wall for the entire fight. One downside of this is that there are often a finite amount of these in an encounter with no passive regen, even outside of combat. This can lead to situations where you leave an encounter at low health and no healables in sight. This might not sound bad on paper, but if the next combat encounter is even moderately challenging and doesn't have many starting heal stones, you end up starting on the back foot. In my experience, this can lead to unnecessary frustration with the game because, as checkpoints normally do, they spawn you back at the health you were when you originally crossed them. Meaning, sometimes combat can feel more like a puzzle when you start at a low health because of the amount of attempt it can take. This is mostly an early game problem, as Kratos' health pool is low to start with, and 3 to 4 hits already means death. In the mid and end game, this problem seems to mostly go away, but for the early hours it can be quite the headache to deal with. Maybe I just needed to get good or something, I don't know, but we continue down the path where we find another room of enemies. This introduces us to our first real puzzle. The puzzle is simple enough, just raise the gate and freeze it in place using the Leviathan axe. Most puzzles in this game aren't too bad, they're fun and can offer a breath of fresh air from all the constant fighting. In all my time playing, I never got fed up or felt any of these were generally unfair, except for that fucking Alfheim axe bit, if you know what I'm talking about. We can also find our first chest in this area, which will grant us access to Hacksilver, our main currency, as well as different abilities and armors later on in the game. Further down the path, we find the deer that we've been hunting, and with Kratos' guidance, Atreus manages to wound it. Kratos helps Atreus mercy kill the animal, presumably for the first time ever. Notice how Kratos attempts to offer comfort to Atreus, but pulls back before he's able to touch him on the back. From out of nowhere, a troll grabs the deer and knocks Atreus into its pit, kicking off our first boss fight. Here, we're introduced to one of the core mechanics of the game, Atreus himself. Atreus can shoot arrows when called upon. These arrows start off doing a small amount of damage, but in its stead, they do an insane amount of stun damage. Atreus can act as a distraction for enemies, open them up for hits, or just, generally hurt them. These arrows regenerate quite fast for all things considered, and allow for Atreus to basically constantly be used and for him to actually feel useful. We can upgrade Atreus later down the line, which will only help strengthen the feeling of the two of them getting more powerful. Now, the boss fight isn't anything out of the ordinary, it's a big troll with a large wooden stone that he can hit you with. His attacks are basic for the most part, with only a few area of effect attacks. On my first playthrough, I basically only used my axe at range, which probably wasn't the best choice, but this was directly after I played both Horizon games 3 times over, so I kinda had a thing going with ranged combat. Overall, there's nothing really remarkable about this first boss. It's a good opener to show you what the rest of the game is going to be like. And I mean really show you how the rest of the game is going to be like. This is because trolls like these make up the vast majority of the bosses in this game. Enter a cool mine? Probably home to a troll. Go to the Bridge of the Damned? Probably as a troll. Enter an ancient vault? Probably as 2 trolls. By the end of the game, these bosses get extremely repetitive, and they're not all that different from each other. Some have fire or ice abilities, and that's basically the extent of it. Remember when I spoke about how repetitive the enemies in this game can get? This is another great example of it, and probably the most egregious in the entire game. On the plus side, we do get to watch this sick-ass execution every time we fight one, and I can't really complain too much about it. Atreus lashes out at the troll after Kratos kills it and starts violently coughing before Kratos is able to stop him and tell him that he is not ready, to which Atreus responds that he hasn't been sick in a long time, something that will come up much later. Atreus thinks his coughing fit is what caused Kratos to exclaim that he's not ready, but in reality, Kratos is disappointed at his son after seeing his lack of emotional control, something he, of all people, is all too familiar with. The next set of enemies is where we get introduced to stun attacks. Below the enemy's health bar is a stun bar, and upon getting filled will cause an enemy to be opened up to a brutal stun attack. Stuns can be lowered several different ways. Standard attacks, barehanded attacks, parries, and with Atreus' arrows. Standard attacks do a moderate amount of stun and will typically just kill the enemy first before they're able to be stunned if that's all you're using. Alternatively, you could use parries to flip the bar even quicker. Barehanded attacks also have a stun bonus that allow for it to fill up faster. And as I mentioned before, Atreus' arrows don't really do that much damage at the beginning of the game, instead they deal a high amount of stun. Typically, using a combination of standard attacks as well as Atreus' arrows is going to be the best way to kill an enemy, whittling down their health and finishing them off with a powerful stun grab. In this area, there is also a magic seal, something that we can't open just yet, but will be important for post-game exploration and fights. Moving on, we are introduced to our first new enemy type, Hellwalkers. These enemies have ice abilities, and as such, cannot be harmed using the Leviathan Axe, at least at this stage, resulting in Kratos beating them to a pulp with nothing but his hands. These enemies will also be a recurrence and offer up a good mix that you can't just mindlessly use the axe at all times. If one of these Hellwalkers is able to inflict the Frosted Sight on you, Kratos will move much slower than usual, making his ability to dodge and parry much worse. We finally make our way home, where we collect Faye's ashes before returning to Atreus inside. Kratos then tries to convince Atreus to hone his anger into his ability to fight, rather than letting it take control of his body. Upon again losing control, Kratos remarks that Atreus is not ready for the journey ahead. I'm gonna go let this next scene play out because honestly, it's one of my favorites.
What was that?
Quiet.
Come on out! There's no use hiding anymore. I know who you are.
What's going on? Do you know him?
More importantly, I know what you are.
Boy, beneath the floor. Now.
But you told me never to go down there. Who is that?
I do not know.
What's he talking about?
I do not know. Get in.
Just tell me what I want to know. No need for this to get bloody. I thought you'd be bigger. But you're definitely the one. Long way from home, aren't you?
What do you want?
Oh, you already know the answer to that.
Whatever it is you seek, I do not have it. You should move on.
And here I thought your kind was supposed to be so enlightened, so much better than us, so much smarter. And yet you hide out here in the woods, like a coward.
You do not want this fight.
Oh, I'm pretty sure I do.
Leave my home.
You are going to have to kill me for that to happen.
I warned you.
Finally.
You would not listen.
Fine. My turn.
The introduction of the stranger is one of the best scenes in the entire game for several reasons. One is that I think every single line said during this interaction has some sort of double meaning to it. We'll come back to this later when we have more information. My other reasoning is because of how well it illustrates Kratos' character. He lets himself get hit by the stranger multiple times before he actually does something. And on top of that, he tries every single way possible to get out of this fight before it escalates to anything further. Something that a younger and more brash Kratos would never have done. Also, the reveal of the stranger's strength is actually just a chef's kiss. We spend the whole introduction thinking Kratos is gonna fuck this guy up for speaking to him that way, only for him to be instantly humbled by someone who has similar strength to him. Now, let's talk about the actual boss fight itself. This boss fight is absolutely exhilarating, with the Stranger's insane speed as well as the Deliverance track blasting in the background. The Stranger isn't too hard of a boss to fight, but he is a much bigger challenge than the first trophy fight, mostly because of his immense speed and ability to close the gap extremely quickly. His first phase is mostly just a few punches and the ability to run around with a few unblockables sprinkled in there. The start of his second phase takes us on top of the house, where the Stranger remarks about how Kratos' house has multiple beds. The quipping during this entire fight scene is also just god tier, with the Stranger essentially making fun of Kratos the entire time. With the Stranger now aware of a second person in the house, this is where shit gets real. Only at the mention of Atreus being harmed does Kratos unleash his old rage. This is a similar mechanic to the rages present in the last few games. Hitting and killing enemies builds up the rage meter, and upon filling it, Kratos becomes immune to damage and fights solely with his fists. Every hit fills Kratos' health slightly, acting as a sort of semi-lifesteal. Every attack also lowers the amount of rage, with more powerful ones requiring more rage to use, and subsequently lowering the time spent in rage. Most of this phase grants us unlimited rage so that we can get used to the mechanic and how it works. The rest of the fight goes on a bit longer, with the Stranger having more powerful attacks overall. One thing I have to mention about basically all of the Norse God of War games is that all of your fights make you feel like you're a god fighting another god. His hits feel punchy and the world is able to crumble under Kratos' feet, and it's genuinely one of the best feelings ever. This fight and the feeling of power it gives was actually what hooked and drew me into the series for the first time. I loved the feeling and I wanted more of it. As someone who has played all the older mainline games except for Ascension, no other game gave me the same feeling of raw power in its cutscenes, and I think that's mainly because Kratos is much more energetic and movable in those games. In this one, he really feels like he's a tank who can body any god who comes close. I do genuinely have an appreciation of how good the cutscenes and fight scenes look during basically all of this game's big ticket moments. In one of the mid-battle scenes, the Stranger remarks that he can't feel anything and makes fun of Kratos for not being able to hurt him. Taking this as a jab at him being old isn't much narratively, but if you interpret it in the literal sense, mythology fans are probably able to start to pinpoint who this guy really is. The third phase is basically more of the same kick-ass fun, with the Stranger again reiterating the fact that he isn't feeling anything from your attacks. He also gets a few new powerful moves added to his arsenal, such as the ice jump, which isn't too hard to dodge and more just a cool aesthetic for a move. The final phase ends with Kratos snapping the Stranger's neck before getting up and slowly walking back to the house to Atreus. During this walk back, we get to see more of Kratos' self-reflection, his worry that he finally has been tracked down from Greece by whoever the Stranger is. We also see him finally reveal that this journey that they had been alluding to for so long was to carry Faye's ashes to the highest peak in all of the realms. We go back into the house and fetch Atreus before we officially start our journey to the peak. This is also where we are given access to the skill tree. Killing enemies can be used to gain experience, which can then be used to acquire a variety of skills. These include barehanded attacks, Atreus attacks, as well as the Leviathan axe. Some of these skills I never found myself using, such as the stance change skills, but others are extremely crucial for the rest of the game. Some, like the parry counter attack, will be extremely useful in everyday encounters, and not having them puts you at an extreme deficit. You can see that each skill has an additional bonus skill that can be activated if your required stat is of that level. These aren't necessary to use the skill, but can be useful as a slight buff. Something I should probably mention was that I struggled through this game so hard on my first playthrough. Like, I was legit dying in every single encounter, and that's entirely my own fault. What I'd thought was that you needed to hit the additional bonus stat before I began investing into the skill. For this reason, I never actually invested in any skills until around 4 or 5 hours into the game during the Alfheim section, which is kind of crazy to think about. I don't know why I never just held square over any of the skills to see if I actually could buy them, but For that reason, you'll be seeing me go into many encounters underleveled and straight up suffering. I also played this game on Give Me a Challenge for the first few hours, and then struggled way too hard in Alfheim, so I finished the game on the normal difficulty, which is really embarrassing. I did end up doing a second playthrough on Give Me God of War, so I'm not that much of a chump. As we leave the house, Kratos and Atreus talk about how daunting the journey is, and the topic of killing other humans comes up, to which Kratos says,
Close your heart to it. On our journey, we will be attacked by all manner of creature. Close your heart to their desperation. Close your heart to their suffering. Do not allow yourself to feel for them. They will not feel for you.
which actually doesn't have a payoff in this game, but does in the next one. We find another puzzle, which I, again, struggled with for far too long to admit I did, so we're just going to push on further. We get to an overlook, which shows Kratos and Atreus' home, with Atreus remarking that the final tree Faye had marked for them being cut down destroyed their protection stave, which allowed the stranger to come and find them. Now, Faye was the one who set up the protection stave, and it seems a bit off that she marked her own stave to be cut down and allowing threats to find her son and husband. Keep this in mind for later. While looting, we find our first runic attack for the entire game. This one is Hell's Touch, which allows Kratos to emit a burst of energy from the axe and knocks back all enemies in his vicinity. There are two versions of the runic attack, light and heavy ones. These can be activated by holding the block button and pressing the corresponding attack button. There are 3 factors to each runic: stun, damage, and elemental. Stun and damage do what it sounds like. Elemental applies whatever the element of the attack is to the enemy, in this case proccing freeze and slowing the enemy down moderately. Runic attacks start off fairly weak and simple, but can be upgraded using XP to make them a real force to be reckoned with. And all of these can be upgraded to the max level too. It's not like these are rarities. If you find one at the beginning of the game and you really dig it, you can carry it all the way to the end of the game if you upgrade it, which is really nice. These act as additional ways to deal damage and level the playing field, but run on a cooldown. Heavier attacks have a stronger cooldown. The higher the cooldown stat of your character is, the faster the timing is for it. In a departure from the original games, 2018 offers a lot more character and playstyle customization than the last few games did. You can focus on strength and health, runic attacks, and cooldown, or anything in between. Each of these attributes correlates with a different stat. Strength and Vigor increase the health of Kratos and dealt damage to enemies. Defense decreases the health loss to enemy attacks. Runic increases the damage of runic attacks, while Luck raises the chance for certain effects to happen depending on the current gear equipped. These are all changed by whatever gear Kratos is equipped, but we'll get into that later when talking about the various armor effects in the game. We push on and clear a few more difficult enemy encounters. One which introduces us to the Heavy Draugr, which has several unblockables and is a lot tankier than the first ones we met in the introduction. We then find our first non-Draugr enemy, a Revenant. This piece of shit is not able to be hit by Kratos' axe under normal circumstances. Instead, this enemy needs to be shot with Atreus' arrows before Kratos is able to land any hits on it, making for an interesting teamwork dynamic and ensuring that the player character actually is utilizing Atreus rather than just letting him fall to the wayside. The next fight we have is against actual human enemies, called Reavers. They aren't anything too out of the ordinary because they have a similar humanoid move to that of the Draugr and the rest of the enemies we've been fighting thus far. Unfortunately, this ends with Atreus having his first human kill, upon which Kratos reiterates his stance of closing your heart to others' suffering. We then meet Brok, a loudmouth bastard of a dwarf who will become one of the blacksmith's characters for the rest of the game. I genuinely love Brok so much, one of the best characters in the entire series. He's also probably the only one who can call Kratos a son of a bitch and actually get away with it. Something else notable that happens in this scene is that Atreus is actually able to speak to Brok's animal, named fucking Gratitude for whatever reason. I believe this is the first time we see Atreus display any affinity for languages in the story. While Kratos and him talk, Brok claims that he and his brother, who we'll meet in a few moments, made the Leviathan axe for Faye, and that he can upgrade it for them. Normally, this will need Frozen Flames, an extremely rare resource, to upgrade the axe's damage, but in this case, Brok has one he's willing to use on the axe. Upgrading the axe increases Kratos' strength with it and bumps up his overall level. In the next section, we enter a room that has Kratos raise the roof so that he can walk on it. This requires the axe to be thrown and freeze the mechanism so the roof doesn't fall back down again. When he steps on the platform, however, multiple enemies spawn in, which serve as a way to force the player into barehanded combat, since Kratos cannot use the axe unless he wants to be crushed. This is, in my opinion, a great way to make sure the player is actively using barehanded fighting, even if it's just for a moment. Having this in the early game makes the player more familiar and comfortable with it, and more likely to use it in the future. The next scene sees Kratos and Atreus on an overlook outside the mountain, where they can see the summit they've been trying to reach the entire time. Here we will yet again see Kratos attempt to touch Atreus on the back, but fail to actually fully commit to the action. In this scene, he is still trying to establish physical closeness with his son, but as of now, he is still unable to do so because of the distance he has done for all of Atreus' life. We end up fighting our second troll of the game, this time being based on fire and lava with its attacks. There's also plenty of other enemies in this area to keep the player busy and make sure they're on their toes. This one's moveset is slightly expanded from the last one, with this one being able to throw fireballs and inflict the burning status effect, which is basically just damage over time. Upon killing the troll, we get our first heavy runic attack, which I explained previously. In this area, we also find a Nornir chest, which is going to be our main way of increasing our health and rage pool. These can be found either around the world or in various different locations, and require you to solve a mini puzzle in order to unlock them. Inside each is either an Apple of Idun for health or a Horn of Bloodmead for rage. The puzzle is basically just finding these bells in the area and hitting them within the time that it takes for all the bells to stop moving. Essentially, you just have to hit the bells as fast as you can. The real challenge here is actually locating these, because damn can these bells be hidden well, and led me on multiple occasions to pull out the guide and find out what I was missing. One thing I do take issue with, however, is that you need to find 3 of these per stat increased. So in order to increase your health, you'll need to find 3 apples of Idun, and in order to increase rage, you need to find 3 horns of Bloodmead. There's no way of knowing what's inside one of these, so sometimes you get really excited that you'll finally get your health upgrade because you already have 2 apples, but instead you get a horn and you feel kind of disappointed. I would have at least liked the ability to choose which one you get, or just to have each apple and horn increase immediately instead of having to find 3 literally every single time. I get that this was carried over from the original games, but it seems really weird in a game that basically wrote everything from scratch that they would keep that of all things. Overall, I like how these increase your stats, except for my one gripe that I just mentioned. We enter a clearing where Atreus and Kratos spot a boar. In the same way we shot the deer earlier, Kratos helps Atreus shoot the boar, but this time the boar runs off after being shot, resulting in Atreus taking off after it. So we catch up to him and find him with a woman, known as the Witch of the Woods. Evidently, she and Atreus are trying to save the boar after they shot it. We help get the boar to her home, where she says she can save it. Apparently, she lives under a giant tortoise named Charlie that Atreus can seemingly talk to. The witch sends Atreus outside, where we have time for a one-on-one conversation. Here she reveals that she knows Kratos is a god, even if he's not from the same realm as her, and gives a warning as to what these gods will do when they find out. And at this point, I believe Kratos already has an idea about that. She also warns him about keeping his nature away from Atreus, and how it will only harm him in the future, before sending Kratos out into the garden to fetch something, where we have possibly one of my favorite bloopers of all time.
Lamb's cress. I'm a fucking god of war.
After our little side quest, we return to the witch and get a blessing from her that makes it harder to track us should anyone decide to follow us. She sends us into a cave below her house and says she will lead us out. We also get her compass, which is going to be our primary way of guidance throughout the world and will allow us to track various quests along our journey. This appears to us as an actual compass on the top of the screen. Now, this compass does take some getting used to because it doesn't exactly point to your exact destination. It always points you towards the next area you should go to. Say the location you are tracking is directly across a gap in front of you, but there's no way to cross it. Instead of pointlessly pointing you towards the gap, it will navigate you around the area so you can actually cross. On paper, this works well, but in practice, the compass can sometimes swing extremely wildly if you walk past a spot, and it can make the place you're supposed to be going kind of ambiguous. For me, it took a bit of getting used to, and then I was done, but I do know from other people that it bothered them for basically the entire time, and they kind of just wanted to turn it off. We're also introduced to the Nightmare enemy variety, which are the kinds of floating eyeballs that are a pain in the ass every time they pop up. Thankfully, they have pretty low health, so dealing with them only really becomes an issue when they're in a group setting or huddled up with other enemies. We also end up finding our first talisman, which can be activated the same way as a runic attack, this time clicking the O button. These function the same as runic attacks as well, because they have a cooldown before they can be used again. Contrary to those, however, these are more focused on supporting Kratos rather than dealing damage. The first one we get just grants a burst of health. Some ones later down the line allow Kratos to apply status easier to enemies, or even to slow down time for a duration. We venture further into the cave before finding a boat. This is going to function as our main mode of transportation besides just our legs. This allows us to traverse the wider world with ease. The boat doesn't have any other functionality other than being a mode of transport, so it's not like there's combat or anything, which I don't really think anyone was expecting, but you never know. The river opens up into revealing the Lake of Nine, the main playable area in the game, although it's not going to be that until a bit later. While in the lake, Kratos mentions a statue of Thor, and eventually asks Atreus if he knows any gods that can feel no pain. Atreus says Baldur is the one who fits that description. Now we have actual confirmation of who this stranger is rather than just speculation. We now approach a statue of Tyr in the middle of the lake. I'm gonna let the next cutscene play out.
The axe did not return. What is this?
It's the World Serpent.
Meet Jormungandr, the World Serpent. He'll be important. What will also be important later is the little notification we see in the top right, Eater Imbued, which explains some things in the next game. I know I'm saying things will be important later and it's probably kind of getting old, but just bear with me for a bit. Because of the World Serpent's rise, the water level around the Lake of Nine has dropped, revealing the shoreline and new areas to explore, as well as Tyr's temples in the middle of the lake. We dock at the temple to see that Brok is already there, somehow. We speak to him and he gives us a stone which can be used for fast travel. At several locations in the game, there are fast travel gateways which can be accessed using the stone. At the moment, you can only travel from somewhere else on the map to Tyr's temple, not the other way around. I think this works beautifully in the early game because it encourages the player to actually explore rather than just constantly fast traveling to the closest location to the objective. Later, this will be changed so you can fast travel to anywhere from anywhere, but it does work spectacularly well at setting the player up early in the game to explore. Brok also says that when you fast travel, you should never throw yourself off the edge of the Yggdrasil, something that you should probably have guessed will be important later. We also get access to his shop fully now. We can buy armors, pommels, and talismans. Armors themselves boost stats, and at later levels give special abilities that allow the player to customize their playstyle however they like. Enchantments are another way of doing this. They can be socketed into armor to increase their buffs and further increase Kratos' overall power. Some of these just boost stats, but some of them have some serious might behind them. Both armors and talismans can be upgraded to different levels depending on what they are. The level of whatever you have equipped is what signifies Kratos' overall level. If you have all level 5 gear, you're a level 5. If you have all level 5 gear plus a level 6 weapon, you're slightly higher than a level 5. Overall, gear level doesn't actually do anything. It just gives you a guide of how well leveled you are compared to your enemies. Pommels act as specific weapon buffs that can be activated upon the completion of a certain action, such as a strength boost on a stun attack or anything like that. All of these give the player a ton of options as to how they want to play the game and go through every situation, something that the older games didn't really have that much of besides from the different weapon options. We leave the temple and continue down the path to the mountain. Here is where we find our first Scorn Pole. These block certain areas of the map until the source is found with the Leviathan Axe. Upon recalling the axe, the hazard will reappear. All this really seems to do is force the player into barehanded combat when there's a Scorn Pole in the area. They're kind of annoying and I'm not the biggest fan of them because they don't really seem to offer that much substance to the game, but I mean, they're there and they're not going anywhere. They're fine. From here on out, I'll be much lighter when speaking about average encounters, because at this point you kind of already know what's going on. Every so often you'll find a new enemy type, and I'll bring them up when they're a substantial addition to the gameplay loop. In this area, you can also find a chest which reveals a Muspelheim cipher, something crucial for being able to unlock the bulk of the endgame content. We then meet Sindri, Brock's aforementioned brother, who is an absolute lad, by the way, because he's willing to square up with Kratos as soon as he sees that he has Faye's axe and is worried that he killed her. We also get hints about the fact that Brock and Sindri have a troubled relationship with each other, to say the least. Sindri is also one of the best characters in this game, just in general. He, along with his brother, are total standouts in the game with some pretty standout characters. They always bring a fresh air to whatever scene they're in, and I really appreciate it. Sindri also has this whole thing with germs going for him, which I really dig and totally relate to. We push up the mountain where we are introduced to a substantially new enemy type, the Ogre. These ones don't look like Shrek though. These dudes pack punch and have a shit ton of health. They almost act like mini-bosses in a way, and they're really enjoyable to fight. It's almost a shame that by the end of the game you fought them so many times that it generally gets annoying every single time another ogre pops up. They're fun at first, but kind of lose their appeal towards the end. One thing I will say though is that they have this absolutely sick-ass stun attack that I can watch over and over again without getting bored. After clearing the room, we get to the foot of the mountain, except there's a black fog that encompasses the entire area, blocking us from passing. The witch suddenly reappears, having obviously been following us, and she says she knows a way to get past this so-called black breath. In order to get through the fog, she says we need to harness the power of the light of Alfheim, which is, you guessed it, Alfheim. She takes us back to Tyr's temple where she explains to us how to use the Bifrost. Before that, she ends up infusing Atreus' bow with elvish magic, allowing it to make light bridges whenever it shoots a light stone. We haven't seen many of these at this point, but they'll become more important in Alfheim. The Bifrost can also be used to travel to any realm as long as we have the cipher for it. We get the ciphers for Alfheim and Helheim through the game's story, while Niflheim and Muspelheim have to be unlocked through exploration. Asgard, Vanaheim, and Svartalfheim, and, well, as Jotunheim, are not playable in this game. The Realm Travel Room also has one of the coolest fast travel animations I've ever seen. It's really sick. We also learn that the Jotunheim Tower as well as the Giants mysteriously vanished some years ago, making realm travel there completely impossible. We make it to Alfheim where the witch is promptly pulled right back into the travel room as she said what happened earlier. I must say that Alfheim has some of the prettiest visuals in the entire game. It also has these noticeable growths scattered throughout that can only be broken by a quick and accurate axe throw that slices through all of the tendrils at the same time. This will be one of the main ways we are going to be solving puzzles in this realm. We're also introduced to some of the lore of the realm, such as the Dark and Light Elves' eternal fight for control of the light of Alfheim. We also get to meet some of them. And by meet, I mean kill, because the Dark Elves fight us on sight and with literally no hesitation. These enemies are actually new and interesting. The Dark Elves are designed in a very bug-like way and also just act like them. They sleep in nests, they make buzzing noises, and they're just bugs. Their ability to fly does make some encounters more interesting because their ability to reposition it's much better than yours, which keeps Kratos on its toes during fights with them. We free a bow and start cruising down the river to where the light is. We make it to the Light Temple where we have to fight a shit ton of these Dark Elf bugs. We solve a short perspective puzzle before we can gain access to the temple. We make our way close to the center of the light, using those aforementioned light bridges that Atreus can now make with his arrows. This isn't much puzzle stuff, it's more just using the ability to see and be able to spot the different light crystals in the distance. Here we're introduced to another enemy type, the Ancients. We'll see a lot of these throughout the game as well. These bosses are basically just gimmick bosses because they can only be hurt when the axe is thrown into its chest cavity while it's attacking. Most of the time, killing these things will just be waiting for an opening and chucking the axe inside of it. You can also turn the tide and fight on your own terms because every hit the Ancient receives will drop these glowing balls which Kratos can throw back to apply stun. This is a rinse and repeat until it's dead. This current boss fight is a Stone Ancient, but there are different types that will be encountered throughout the world. These are mostly aesthetic differences rather than actual gameplay differences, but sometimes the elemental damage they do will change. For a game franchise once renowned for its boss fights, it's kind of insane to me that one of the main complaints against one of this entries is that there just aren't enough bosses. Thankfully, Ragnarok will rectify this issue, but in the meantime, this is kind of just what we got. We discover that the light is absolutely infested with these nest growths from the Dark Elves, and that the only way to get to it is to cut down their hive. We carve through many more elves on our way to destroy it until we actually get into it. We end up destroying a whole portion of their home and end up killing a not insignificant amount of them. This moment was absolutely insane just because of the sheer number of dark elves we have to fight this time. It's hectic, chaotic, and I don't know what's going on, but I love it. We give Atreus the axe to defend himself and then step into the light to refill the Bifrost. We get pulled into the light where we hear Faye's voice, which is later revealed to be diegetic in Ragnarok. Kratos begins hearing Atreus speak to Faye before her death. He reveals that he doesn't want to lose her and be left alone with his father, someone he barely knows and who has never really been there for him. Whether or not these are really Atreus' words from the past is unclear, but what it does highlight is Kratos and Atreus' relationship at the start of the game. They are strangers. The only connection the two of them have is that they share blood. Hell, at the beginning of the game, Kratos asked Atreus if Faye taught him to hunt, something that he should definitely know if he was around for even the slightest bit of time. Obviously to the player, we know why. He's scared of turning his son into him, and as such, keeps him as far away as possible in order to not negatively affect him as a person growing up. This reveals that this is Kratos' first time parenting Atreus, and that everything he does in the game is to make sure Atreus does not turn into him. Just before being pulled out of the light, we see a bridge with its end cut off. Kratos is unable to see what is on the other side as he is ripped out by Atreus. This is also about the time I actually started learning that I can use XP, which is really embarrassing on my part. With the Bifrost recharged, we gain the ability to power up Atreus' arrows with the Light of Alfheim. These arrows are selected and will shoot every time Kratos commands Atreus to. These deal increased stun damage and apply magic onto an enemy. We end up opening the temple up to the light, allowing the light elves back into it. We have to go through the underground in order to make our way back to the boat, so that is what we do. We go through a few more light puzzles and fight a light revenant before we make our way back to the lift to get us out of the underground. As we reach the pedestal, we come across the Dark Elf King, who gave me way too much trouble than he should have been worth. He's essentially just a stronger version of the standard Dark Elf that is quicker and deals more damage. I genuinely don't know why this guy gave me such a hard time. It took me like a full hour. It's kind of insane, even though I'd been killing Dark Elves for quite a while at this point. But finally, upon killing him, the elves' final words is that we picked the wrong side. We return to the Realm Travel Room so that we can head back to Midgard and make our way up the mountain. I think now is a good time to talk about the Travel Room. In this game, this room is the only way to travel between the realms, which can make it somewhat irritating every time you want to do anything. You have to fast travel from where you currently are back to the temple, make your way inside the room, go to the table and select your destination. You then have to wait for the room to turn all the way around to the proper realm and for you to actually travel to it, which takes a few seconds. Only then are you allowed to actually enter the next realm. At first this felt really cool because, well, it looks dope as hell, but towards the end, in the actual endgame, it gets genuinely annoying because of how long it takes to do anything. Ragnarok does rectify this by allowing us to fast travel from one gate to another in basically any realm, which is much appreciated. Upon exiting the room, Brok explains some more about Sindri and gives him a few backhanded compliments. Continuing to talk to Brok is how we get our first side quest. The primary quest givers in this game are going to be Brok and Sindri, with a few more that you can find out in the open world. These are actually called favors in game, which fits quite well considering Kratos is typically very apprehensive about going to them, and it's Atreus who pushes his fathers to take these on. A lot of these quests will take the player to a new area that they've never been to before and allow you to unlock a new section of the map. For some of these, the only way you can get in is through starting the side quest. The Andvari side quest, the one I'm showing, can only be entered using a stone that you get from starting said quest. It's always worth looking to get into these because you never know what new area you're going to stumble across. I guess the best way to put these is that they lead Kratos and Atreus onto a dungeon-type encounter with puzzles and small narrative moments between the two of them. A lot of these have Kratos imparting some small amount of wisdom or a life lesson onto Atreus, which I think fits in very well. These quests typically reward us with XP or a unique item such as a talisman or an enchantment. In this particular quest, it sees us fighting a Soul Eater, which is a hyped up for basically the whole thing, only for it to be revealed that it's just another variant of the Ancient that we have fought before in Alfheim, which was a slight disappointment on my first playthrough. There is a really good quest in the game that revolves around someone offering to allow Kratos and Atreus to speak to Faye again. Atreus obviously gets really excited, while Kratos tells him to keep his expectations low, and he'll never be disappointed. Obviously, he doesn't do this, and then when it's revealed that the spirit was just offering to kill them, it makes it all the more heartbreaking when Atreus learns the hard way that you can't always trust everyone. We return to the mountain, this time with the ability to light the different Alfheim lights with Atreus' bow. In this instance, it's only lore, but in future sections, the Alfheim lights can actually be used offensively, and in order to get around, which is really nice because they actually have some sort of depth to them. We take the Bifrost and the light and use it to expel the Black Breath, allowing us to go even further up the mountain. While we are inside the mountain, we find out it was an old giant's home, one that seems long since abandoned. We also get confirmation that giants, in this case, is a race rather than an adjective for someone's size, with some giants being only the height of a regular human, but that's not to say that giants can't be absolutely huge, because some definitely do live up to that name. Further in, we also see these red electrified roots that block our path in some segments, forcing us to have to go around them. We also find similar blue roots that can't be broken called Hell's Bramble. At this point, we've been making pretty slow progress up the summit, but we find a broken lift which we can use to boost our progress further up. We yet again fight another troll and kill it, because obviously it had to be a troll. We get another conversation where Atreus finds an old giant lantern and lights it. He writes a prayer on the giant's lantern for them to watch out over his mother in the light of Alfheim. We finally see Kratos physically touch Atreus, which him finally putting his hand on his back after having been afraid to do it for so long. We find another lift and have to go through several gauntlets of enemies, which I struggled with for way too long, by the way. Draugr and trolls literally come out of nowhere. It's a real struggle the first time I went through, but on subsequent playthroughs, it's a blast. It's really fun. So I think it might just be safe to say it's a skill issue. We finish off the enemies, and it looks like it's a straight shot to the summit until this happens.
We're almost at the summit. Nothing's gonna stop us.
Calm yourself, boy, and stay behind me.
We hit the shit out of Hraezlir's claws until he retreats and breaks the lift. We also find shatter crystals, which are findable in the world and allow us to break the electrified red roots from earlier whenever they're thrown at them. We exit onto an opening and see Hraezlir attacking Sindri. As much as Kratos does not want to intervene, Atreus convinces him to fight the dragon to protect Sindri. This kicks off our second major boss fight. There are several scatter crystals in this area, but the dragon is unreachable with the axe melees. Hraezlir is off to the side shooting electric bolts at Kratos every once in a while. If you can put two and two together fast enough, you can find out that throwing the crystals at the dragon will result in an explosion, dealing damage and stunning it. Or the game could just tell you after a few seconds. That also works too, I guess. Hraezlir will move from side to side of the arena at different points and is really just about making sure he doesn't squash you when doing so. Now, timing is somewhat important in this fight, as the dragon is not using his electricity all the time, and the crystals do nothing to him. Because of this, you need to wait for him to do a lightning attack before using a crystal. We can also hit his feet whenever they're on the ground, which isn't as much damage as hitting his head while he's dazed, but still is something. I actually really enjoy this boss fight, and it's really just made better by its kick-ass soundtrack. The soundtrack of this game is absolutely phenomenal. Bear McCreary does such a good job at making every moment hit so hard. From the most bombastic action set pieces to the most intimate moments, this guy is a master at sound. I've never had a soundtrack put this much feeling into me than basically ever before. I mentioned that the Horizon series had some of my favorite music in the past, and that's still true, but God of War can now also claim the title of having a dedicated playlist in my Spotify account. Using a nearby crane and some explosive stuff that's in the area, we're able to absolutely murk Hraezlir in what is yet another absolute moment of cinema. As a token of gratitude, Sindri gives us new green arrows to use on the rest of our journey. He also teaches Atreus a new spell that allows him to shoot electric arrows from his bow. This allows us to do two things: destroy the tree roots without having to use shatter crystals all the time, and allows us a new tool in combat that can be swapped to from the magic arrows we got earlier. These new arrows deal less stun to a target, but can arc from one enemy to another, allowing for increased damage overall. I typically stick to the magic arrows because I like dealing high stun to enemies, but everyone can find something that they like because of this. I never ended up switching arrow types too because of this, but to each their own. We then climb up to the top where we finally see the summit in view. Our journey is almost over. Before we make it there, Atreus mentions how his quiver broke in the fight. Kratos fixes his equipment using a tip of the green arrow to tie it into place and securing the arrowhead to Atreus. We cross the gap between us and the summit, fighting several Hellwalkers along the way. We make it to the other side and start climbing where we hear this conversation.
Those voices too, right?
Yes, be silent.
Sorry. You know why we're here. The last visit managed to loosen your tongue.
That sounds like the same man who came to our house. You said you killed him.
Shh. You brought company this time. Must be important if the sons of Thor deign to grace me with their presence. Tell me, you two still tripping over yourselves to impress Daddy?
The tattooed man. Tracks show he now travels with a child. Where would they go next?
Why would I know that?
You're the smartest man alive, aren't you?
Smarter than all the dead ones, too.
You help me, I help you. Tell me where they are, and I'll talk to Odin.
Your father won't let me go, Balder, and he won't let you kill me. You have nothing to offer me, so take your questions, take your threats, take these two worthless wankers, and piss off!
We get to the top and speak to the man stuck in the tree who was being interrogated. We find out this is Mimir, the smartest man alive who has been imprisoned in the tree by Odin for over a century. We also find that the stranger from earlier was Balder, and he did survive our encounter. On top of that, Thor's sons, Magni and Modi, are now also hunting us. Continuing to talk to him, we also get this reveal about Freya's wish.
She wanted us to spread her ashes on the highest peak in all the realms.
Oh, then you've come to the wrong place, little brother. The highest peak in all the realms is not here in Midgard. It's in Jotunheim, realm of the giants.
He says there is no way to get to Jotunheim with the Bifrost, but he says that he can help them find a way there if they can cut him free. He says, rather bluntly, that the only way to free him is to cut off his head and that he can be revived by this Witch of the Woods that they met earlier. Before taking his head, Mimir warns Kratos of the dangers of keeping his identity hidden from Atreus, now being the second person to tell him this exact thing. Making our way back to Brock, we find our first armor for Atreus. This allows us to customize his abilities and how they work. These are only minor differences since they mostly focus on Atreus, but it's good to have nonetheless because it gives the player, again, more expression for how they want to play. We return to the witch's house where we ask her to restore Mimir's head. Before she can answer, she sees Atreus' green arrows and destroys them, saying that they're wicked and that they must be destroyed. She becomes uncharacteristically aggressive when she says this, something Kratos picks up on when he puts his arm out in front of Atreus. We start the magic for Mimir's revival where this scene plays out.
Oh. Hello, Freya. Been a long time. You look well.
What I did for them. As far as I'm concerned, death suits you better.
I'd bow if I could, Your Majesty. Forgive me. Had I known the Witch in the Woods was Freya herself, I never would have suggested this.
Kratos, feeling betrayed, leaves Freya's house. As we talk to Mimir, we find out that he evidently has some gaps in his knowledge, presumably as a result of his resurrection. Mimir tells us that the bridge on the summit can only be activated by carving a specific rune into the stones, which make up the gate, which is only possible with an enchanted chisel. The rune can also be found under Tyr's temple, also blocked by a seal that needs the chisel in order to be opened. So that becomes our first thing on our list. On our way to the chisel, we were told of Thamur, a frost giant blacksmith who was killed by Thor and froze the area around where he fell, killing countless. We come to find out the weapon Thor used to kill Thamur was his very own chisel, the one we came to find. We also meet a new enemy here, the Wolver. When I tell you that these are godless fucks, I mean it. I don't think there's a single enjoyable trait in either game they're in. They attack so fast, have so many unblockables, and move so fucking fast it's insane. Not to mention they can tank hits like nobody's business. They have this stupid goddamn attack where they send a flurry of attacks at you and don't stop for 5 or so seconds, leaving you open from attacks from the back unless you can parry them on the first flurry, because it's literally hopeless otherwise. I think the only positive thing to say about this archetype is that they probably have the most gory finisher in this entire game, and they deserve every ounce of pain that they get from it. We find out that the chisel is trapped under Thamur's head, under a thick layer of ice, meaning that the only way to get there is to smash through it. In a really nice teaching moment, Kratos and Atreus try to think about how to get through the ice and to see if he can come up with a solution on his own without Kratos' help. As the story progresses, Kratos seems to actually start teaching his son some valuable lessons which bring the characters closer together. This plan that Atreus figures out is to use the giant hammer suspended near Thalmor's corpse to break the ice, which is exactly what we do. In a line of dialogue on the Ascent, Mimir reveals that Thor slaughtered the vast majority of the giants on Odin's orders, the main factor in the giants returning to Jotunheim and hiding their realm tower. I really like Mimir in this game because he works on two levels. He's a great exposition dump for those who are new to Norse mythology, as well as those who don't really know the alternate version of the mythology told in the game. Some stuff is changed from the original myths, such as Thor sending the world serpent back in time during Ragnarok, rather than them just killing each other during the war. Mimir is primarily used for exposition, but the writers do it in a way that makes him his own character while also explaining the lore to the player. It's a great way to introduce the world to us through a character that we already like and is with us basically the whole time. The exposition in this game doesn't really get boring either. It's very good because of how masterfully Mimir as a character is written, which I will always appreciate. We end up dropping the hammer and make it inside the chisels area. As we get closer, we start to hear the voices of Magni and Modi. Kratos decides to hurry, hoping to avoid a confrontation with another god. They make it to the chisel, and as they get there, the sons of Thor show up and force us into a boss fight. This fight is actually mechanically interesting for a few reasons. One brother will focus on Kratos while the other will focus on Atreus. Most of the time, this turns into a 1v1, but occasionally they'll swap places and try to catch you off guard. Other times, they'll both target you, and suddenly that means that the player can't get too comfortable in this one-on-one arrangement. Even though we only get a little bit of it on screen with both Magni and Modi, I enjoy their dynamic quite a bit. Magni is obviously the far more put-together one and competent, while Modi is the immature one and he's quite full of himself. Magni very much seems like the golden boy of the pair, especially since he has a much leaner build and blonde hair like his mother. Modi, on the other hand, is short and takes after his father's build and hair color. Their first phase is pretty simple, and when they've both been stunned, you end up getting into an interesting back-to-back with Atreus, where you have to circle and wait to see where they're coming from. The entire time Modi is arguing with Atreus and talking smack about Faye, which would be really funny in normal circumstances, except for the fact that Atreus doesn't take too well to Yo Mama jokes and gets increasingly agitated at Modi. The next phase starts with the same back-to-back. However, this time one brother will attack, and if you block the other brother, will come back and hit you from behind. Oftentimes, you have to do a full 180 in order to catch him, which feels really good when done right. During the final phase, both brothers act far more aggressively and are seemingly getting more and more desperate because they couldn't immediately kill the problem right in front of them, something that's seemingly not familiar with them. And then the fight ends with this scene.
I'll kill you!
Atreus! Control yourself!
How did you... You have no idea. You son of a bitch!
No! Get these guns! I'll rip your head off!
And just like that, Kratos has killed another god after countless years. We also see Atreus lose his cool and snap at Modi in a fit of rage, something very fitting for the son of his father. We also see that Atreus' sickness is coming back, this now being the second time it's happened after he gives in to his rage. Atreus insists he's fine, so we press on and grab the chisel. This will allow us to open new areas in the map using a short minigame like the one seal I mentioned Kratos could not open at the very beginning of the game. On our way out, there's some discussion as to Kratos' god killing and what that means, and Atreus is surprised that killing a god is even possible. Now, I kind of expected there to be more of a discussion about this considering, well, Kratos, but the subject is dropped pretty quickly. It makes sense that he wouldn't say much, but I expected Atreus to freak out a bit more, or for Mimir to start to worry a bit after all, they killed Thor's son. It certainly doesn't feel as heavy as I would have liked it to, but unfortunately we don't ever get anything to this effect, at least at this point. On the way back, there is an ominous magic seal which we can now break with a chisel. On my first playthrough, I went down there out of curiosity. Meet Gunnar. Odin's Valkyrie. These bosses are really tough, and are typically reserved for the endgame, but I decided to take her on now. All the Valkyries in this game hit like trucks and are extremely quick, but there's something oddly beautiful about her attacks and how fluid they are. Each one blends right into the next, and it seems like every move is powerful and calculated. This is the same for all the Valkyrie fights in the game. They each have their own gimmick or ability that makes them unique to fight. And the Valkyries are some of the most enjoyable bosses I've fought in recent memory because of how they look and function. It's a real test of skill to kill one of these, and an even bigger one to take on Sigrun, the Valkyrie Queen. Sigrun can be found after fighting all 8 other Valkyries in the game and uncovering their story. Sigrun is the combination of all of these fights, and she makes you know it. Her attacks are hard, fast, and well, kinda beautiful. She combines all the attacks of her predecessors and can pull out each Valkyrie's ability at will. She is truly a testament to this player's skill. If they can beat her, they've mastered the game and all of its mechanics. I think it took me around 2 hours to finally beat her, which is about as long as it took me to kill Malenia and Malekith in Elden Ring, so that should give you an example. And those 2 recent examples were from last week, around 2 years after I played God of War 2018 for the first time. Yeah, I know I don't have the best track record when it comes to making videos on time, do I? I finally managed to kill Gunnar and rip her wings off, which is fucking brutal, but feels so well earned to be able to do. We return to the temple with the chisel and are now able to open the door. We get some more exposition by Mimir, where he tells about how Tyr was loved by all the people of the realms, especially by the giants. They granted both him and Mimir their special sight, which allows them to enter Jotunheim. Kratos and Atreus prepare to go into the temple when this happens.
Yeah, I do. Smells like rain?
You ruined everything. I earned that fucking hammer. But now, everyone's gonna think I only got it because Magni's gone. It'll be a joke. But if I kill you, no one's gonna laugh at me. Oh, are you dumb? That your father's doing? Or did you get it from your mum? She's stupid and ugly.
Shut up! You don't know anything about my mother.
Oh, it's true. But I'm gonna get to know you really well. You're gonna be my new brother. Right after I finish killing your father! Whoops. I think I broke him. No. Stay back. No! This isn't over!
The trip back to Freya's house is somber as all hell. It takes a decent amount of time, and because of the natures of the game's one-shot camera, the game makes us sit with what happened for an uncomfortable amount of time, making us feel the anxiety and nervousness that Kratos must be feeling. This is one of the best benefits of having the one-shot camera, because there is not a single instance we miss between the 2 protagonists, and it allows us to endear ourselves to the characters of this game much better. On the journey back, Mimir also tells us why Atreus has been ill. It's because the battle in his mind begins to manifest in his body. He believes himself to be human, but his body knows that he is more than that, resulting in his illness being made manifest. Freya and Mimir had been warning of this for the entire time, and what better way to show the faults in Kratos' way of teaching than to give it a physical and tangible consequence on another character. Freya initially doesn't let the pair in, but upon hearing of Atreus' illness, she immediately comes to their aid. Freya says that the only way to heal him is to get to the Bridge of the Damned and take the Keeper's Heart, where Kratos drops one of the hardest lines I've ever heard.
Hell.
the realm of the dead. Do you know it?
Not this one.
She also tells Kratos his Leviathan axe will be useless in Helheim due to the extreme cold there. Older fans probably have a feeling about where this is going. The second boat ride is even longer, this time without having any player input at all. I absolutely love the taking away of the player's agency. As I mentioned previously, it instills the same feeling that Kratos has. Not only that, but it makes the player feel the consequences of what Kratos is about to do next. We also get a surprise cameo from Athena, just in case there was any confusion as to what was going to happen next. The atmosphere continues to be absolutely amazing. The sky is red and the heavens are splintered by lightning. I'm gonna let the next scene play because it just speaks for itself.
There's nowhere you can hide, Spartan. Put as much distance between you and the truth as you want. It changes nothing. Pretend to be everything you are not. Teacher, husband, father. But there is one unavoidable truth you will never escape. You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
I know. But I am your monster no longer.
The introduction of the Blades is handled with all the weight and respect it should be. This is the past that Kratos swore to hide. This is everything that he has been running from, and he is returning to it to save his son's future. The Blades themselves attack fast and light, dealing increased damage to Ice-type enemies. It also has vastly increased range and will often swing behind Kratos, allowing him to hit enemies who attack him from his flank. Many of the combos and moves from the older games actually return in this one, with slightly more grounded animations, which I think has to be one of the coolest things ever. We fast travel to Tyr's temple and then to Helheim. We trudge our way through the land of the dead, facing enemies on the way there. We also see Hell's Bramble, what I mentioned earlier. Attacking with the Blades can clear it and make the path forward. The Blades also come with their own upgrades tree and skills. Despite being introduced halfway through the game, they still very much have a full tree, which I immensely appreciate. Now, the Blades can be thrown, but they have a limited reach and can only be used to grab enemies and deal damage to them. In order to upgrade them, instead of using Frozen Flames, these use Chaos Flames, which can be essentially acquired the same way as Frozen variants. We get closer, and then we see that the Keeper is a troll? God damn it. He's very similar to the trolls we've fought in the past, which is to be expected, except he has a few unique attacks. He can teleport between his bash attack, and can also leave these glowing soul balls which track Kratos and hurt on impact. He also has a few unique ice attacks too, but nothing which is exceptional to set him up really apart from the other trolls. I have literally no idea why Santa Monica went with another troll for the Keeper. It makes no sense. According to rumors I've heard, this was actually supposed to be Hraesvelgr, who you can see in the distance during the fight, but got cut due to timing concerns, which is... it's really unfortunate. Upon killing him, we also get a unique animation and have a semi-quick time event where we have to carve the Keeper's heart out. We also get this scene when starting to get turned back.
Kratos. Zeus.
Zeus?
My father.
Your father was Zeus? Well, that explains a lot.
What is that place?
Never go there. Understand?
Can you guess where we're going to go later? Anyways, Brok returns and is able to upgrade our blades to allow them to catch the winds of hell and transport them for a limited time. This is entirely puzzle based and doesn't help us at all in the rest of combat. It gives us access to new areas we couldn't get into before, which is always nice, but I kind of would have liked a more practical application, like having increased damage or elemental buildup when it's equipped, especially since it only lasts for like 10 seconds and immediately returns to the last place it was kept. But anyways, during the trip back, Mimir says this.
I finally understand. I'm dangling from the hip of the bloody ghost of Sparta.
Do not call me that.
Oh, don't mistake me, brother. From what I heard, the Pantheon had it coming. But it's still a bit to take in. I knew you hate gods, but you really can't stay away from them, can you?
You must say nothing to the boy. He must never know.
Bollocks, brother. Respectfully, bollocks. He has to know. He'll never be whole without the truth. Look, I get it. You hate the gods. All gods. It's no accident that includes yourself. And it includes your boy. Can you see that? He feels that. He can't help what he is. He can't begin to help it because you haven't even told him. It's all connected, man.
You will tell him nothing.
Brok also tells us that he fixed our travel stone, meaning we can now use it to take any gate to any other gate, not just to Tyr's temple like initially. We take the heart back to Freya, and Kratos decides that he needs to tell Atreus the truth, or risk everything getting worse once again. Kratos finally tells Atreus of his godhood, and again, I'm just gonna let this play out.
Why'd you say nothing?
You said I was cursed. You think I'm weak because I'm not like you. I know I was never what you wanted. But after all this, I thought maybe things were different.
You do not know everything, boy.
No. But at least I know the truth now.
The truth. The truth. I am a god, boy. From another land far from here. When I came to these shores, I chose to live as a man. But the truth is, I was born a god. And so were you. Boy, have you nothing to say?
Can I turn into an animal?
Can you turn into an animal? No. No, I do not think so.
I'm a god. Mother knew? She was a god too?
No. She was mortal, but she knew my true nature.
We then enter the vault and actually start descending. Atreus starts saying some questionable things about how other people are beneath him since he's a god. Mimir tries to push back, but it isn't enough since Kratos doesn't join him. They start seeing Tyr's murals on the wall, where Mimir explains that Tyr was a god of war, not one who waged it endlessly, but found ways around it entirely. Mimir also explained that Tyr was not restricted to his pantheon. Rather, he was an explorer who visited many realms, the known ones being Japan, Aztec, Egypt, and Greece. Tyr is the antithesis of the god Kratos used to be. The rune we need to find is guarded in the vault, meaning we have to solve several puzzles in order to get it. We end up stumbling upon a storeroom with treasures from Greece. One pot in the room depicts the ghost of Sparta with his signature red markings. We enter into a scuffle, which ends up removing Frey's protection rune from us, but alas, we end up claiming the room. In order to escape the room, we have to fight two... God damn it, trolls. These ones are, at the very least, interesting. One is the Grendel of the Ashes, and the other is the Grendel of the Frost. This battle is actually interesting because you need to use both weapons in order to beat it. The Frost Grendel can only be hurt with the blades and is healed by axe hits, and vice versa for the Ashes Grendel. This keeps things interesting because you basically have to hot swap weapons for the entire fight. Alternatively, you could just run around with your fists and do it the way I did in my third playthrough. That works too. But on the way back up to the summit, we also see Atreus be an absolute ass to Sindri about his problems with his brother. I mean, sure, Atreus is right that Sindri and Brock are annoying about their little sibling squabble, but he's right for the wrong reason. Atreus believes that their problems mean basically nothing because they aren't important enough to be a big deal. They aren't gods like Atreus and Kratos. Kratos actually does catch this and ends up chastising Atreus for the way he's been acting. Atreus later continues to be a little bitch all the way up the mountain, and it gets genuinely annoying, and I think that's the point. He's a little idiot loudmouth kid, and the devs want to hammer that home, and how his new mindset of superiority is only harming him and those around him. We get to see this on full display when we enter the mountain again.
Thor, blame me. Me, for what you did to Magni. My own father called me a coward.
Looks like he did more than that. Move it, or we'll pick up where he left off.
I'll kill you.
No. He is beaten. Not worth killing.
He should pay for what he said about Mother.
I said no.
But we're gods. We can do whatever we want.
That's what I said to your mother, right before I gave it to her.
What are you doing?
This is a much better knife than Mother's.
You killed against my wishes. You lost control.
Haven't you been teaching me to kill?
I've been teaching you to survive. We are gods, boy. And that makes us a target. From now until the end of days, you are marked. So I teach you to kill, yes, but in defense of yourself. Never as an indulgence.
Nobody cared about him anyways. What's the difference?
There are consequences to killing a god!
Why? How do you know? How do you know?
Watch your tone, boy.
Whatever.
And just like that, our second god is dead. All because of a Yo Mama joke. Once we actually get further into the mountain, things start to take a turn for the worse. At this point, Atreus will actually stop listening to the player's command and act entirely on his own. After having to rely on him for so long, it feels almost alien to not be able to spam square to stun an enemy. I love this thing because not only does it annoy Kratos, Atreus actually starts to annoy you, and that is something I think a lot of games need to do. Even though it's hard, it is possible to sync the player and the character's thoughts up perfectly during gameplay. We finally make it up to the top, where the duo is attacked by Baldur. Kratos accidentally destroys the gate, and Baldur grabs Atreus and runs off. They fight on top of Baldur's Dragon, and that scene's just sick, by the way. But eventually, Kratos falls off and follows Baldur to the travel room. They somehow mess things up so bad, the trio was sucked into Helheim and shot all the way into the area Mimir directly told Kratos not to go. That was not so subtle foreshadowing in the beginning of that section. Kratos finally gives Atreus the talk that he deserves. We see an echo of the pair's memory of Atreus killing Modi, and Atreus, for whatever reason, can't seem to believe that he did that. I find it weird that Atreus doesn't seem to have many memories of this time of him being an asshole. The devs make it seem like he was possessed during the time and not in control of his body, when we know for a fact he was. It just seems really odd that this area was written this way, because on one hand, it allows the player to relate more to Atreus, but on the other, it takes away all of the consequences of his actions, because, you know, he didn't know what he was doing, he wasn't in his right mind, which I just think is so strange, and I'm not sure why Santa Monica went this direction. But anyway, on the way back, we see Baldur talking to an illusion of Freya, where we find out what happened to him. Earlier in the story, Freya mentioned that she had a son that was prophesied to have a needless death, and in order to stop this, she cast a spell on him so that no harm may ever come to him. It had the unfortunate side effect of taking away all of his senses except for his sight and hearing, meaning he can no longer feel, touch, smell, or taste anything at all anymore. This is Baldur. Norse mythology fans could probably tell the twist of Freya being Baldur's mother from a mile away, because, well, that's just what it is in mythology, but it was a very good reveal for basically everyone else. Baldur is rightfully upset at his mother, but she refused to take away her quote-unquote blessing, saying that she knew what was best for him. After he leaves, Kratos asks Mimir why he was not told about this earlier, considering Mimir knew both Freya and Baldur. They eventually find out it was because Freya had put an enchantment on him when he was being resurrected, that barred him from speaking about their relation to one another. Kratos and Atreus make their way to a boat, which they jimmy-rig to fly, that's the whole thing, and they fly it to Tyr's temple in order to get back. On the boat ride back, Kratos is haunted with the vision of him killing Zeus, something he brings up to Atreus, but Atreus says that he never sees. I want to talk about this vision real quick because it's just so cool, because, well, it literally goes into first person, which is the exact same way that you kill Zeus in God of War 3, which is just amazing. I love this callback. Continuing on, we enter the temple and we find that one of Tyr's shrines had a message in it, how to get to Jotunheim. The only way it can be found is with a key, one Brock and Sindri have to reunite in order to make. This key opens up an area underneath Tyr's temple, where an object called the Unity Stone is located. We acquire the stone by doing some shenanigans that involve flipping the realm travel room upside down. The Unity Stone allows us to jump off the edge of the realm between realms and go anywhere we'd like, the very same area we've been going through whenever we fast traveled. This is also what Brock had warned us against in the first place. Do not jump off the edge, but he's Kratos, he's not going to listen to Brock anymore. Jumping down reveals the Jotunheim Tower, which Tyr locked away when the giants left so that Odin could never find them. We use the Unity Stone and fight an absolute gauntlet of enemies from all the realms we visited in this game. There's one way for each, and it provides a significant challenge, which I enjoy the hell out of going through every time. Just throwing bodies after bodies at the player, it's so exhilarating and one of the best parts of the game overall. I hadn't visited Muspelheim or Niflheim at this point, so I was confronted with a bunch of new enemy varieties that I had never seen before, which posed another enjoyable challenge. We fight yet another troll who acts exactly the same as all the others we've fought, but this one is also paired with an ogre to keep things somewhat interesting in the grand scheme of things, even though it doesn't really work. We eventually end up leaving the tower to find ourselves back on the Lake of Nine, with the tower having been transported with us. We prepare to travel to Jotunheim, but Mimir remarks that the crystal to finalize the realm shift isn't there, so it isn't going to work. Fortunately, the secret site that the giants had gifted him earlier allows him to be used as a crystal, because his eyes are technically crystals. It's a whole thing, but Mimir needs both of his eyes, and currently he only has one, the other being taken by Odin while he was imprisoned. We figure out that the eye is actually inside Jormungandr, the big snake, having accidentally eaten the statue that contained it earlier in the story. We have Mimir speak to the snake to allow him to allow us passage, inside in order to retrieve the eye from his stomach, to which Jormungandr actually allows us to. Now, unknown to me at the time, this was our point of no return for the story. Entering his mouth would have locked us out of all other content until the main story is finished. I think they should have made this a bit clearer because I genuinely had no idea this would be happening this early. It's completely possible I missed something and just wasn't aware they said this was the point of no return, but I did miss it, which makes what happens next all the more jarring. Now that we're nearing the end, I think it's time we talk about the other content in the game that can be done at this point or after the conclusion of the story. The main draws of these are the Valkyrie fights, Muspelheim Trials, and Niflheim Maze. I already spoke about the Valkyries, so I'll talk about the other two realms. Unlike Alfheim, these realms are entirely devoted to a game mode. Both of these are most similar to a roguelike, I would guess, having the player constantly go through each thing in order to scrape up as many resources as possible. Thankfully, you can get the best armor sets in the game from completing these trials several times. The Muspel Trials have a certain objective that needs to be completed in a certain amount of time, such as killing enemies, stun attacking them, or barehanded kills. You need to complete approximately 15 of these before you can get to the end and fight another Valkyrie. Getting up there isn't too bad, but the amount of times you actually need to do this for the armor sets are kind of absurd. It's a real fucking grind to be able to do this, and by the time I was able to finish them, I was completely burnt out and kind of just tired of the game. They were fun to begin with, but quickly lost their appeal by the end of it. Same goes for the Niflheim Maze. You navigate around the maze, opening chests and clearing encounters to increase your stock of mist echoes, which can be used to buy armor. The longer you're in there, the more echoes you get, but if you die before you reach the exit, you lose it all. The main catch is that the air is poisonous, meaning there's a strict time limit on Kratos to get out. Opening chests increases the time, but often not enough to make up for the amount of time it took to clear the encounter, meaning you can't stay in there forever, which I think is a good choice. Unfortunately, again, I think this gets really old really fast, and I had the same level of exhaustion, if not more, from doing all of these and the Muspel Trials. I think this could possibly just be because at this point I'd been pushing like 30 hours in the game. I had already been playing a lot, and just having this much gameplay like shoved in at this time was just generally very exhausting, and it wasn't the most fun experience. But again, these are optional, so you don't really need to do them. In both of these sections, there is also a Valkyrie to kill, but you do need to get through these multiple rooms and pass quite a few traps in order to fight her, so this does become one of the harder fights, taking into account the time limit not going away. On the brighter side, one of the armor sets you get in here is one of the best in the entire game, and can make the rest of the game a cakewalk if you get it done early enough in the story. Now that we've spoken about that, let's get back to the story. We find the eye in the Thor statue and begin to exit Jormungandr when he suddenly spits us out and sends us hurtling to the ground. Freya appears to us and asks about this disturbance, where she reveals she's looking for her son. Speaking of the devil, he appears and confronts the group. Baldur is, rightfully, upset at Freya, but Freya just wants to talk to her son again. Cue her saying possibly the worst string of words I've ever heard in this order.
I know that you're still angry. I know that how you feel hasn't changed, but I want you...
How I feel? How I feel?
This scene is so good, but I'm not going to let it play because this video is already too long. Kratos decides to intervene, but I can't watch this scene without seeing this video.
I'll with you later. But family first.
We start the fight with Baldur having very similar attacks to his first time we fight him. This time Freya starts being annoying and ties us and Baldur to the ground multiple times, which we can escape from a quicktime event. During a moment where Kratos is tied down, Atreus actually gets punched and this happens.
No! Atreus! You're bleeding. Breathe, boy. Breathe!
Not my blood.
What is that? I can feel this. I can feel everything.
If you hadn't guessed it already, the green arrows Sindri gifted were mistletoe arrows, which, Freya knowing that Baldur's only weakness was mistletoe, results in her burning it. With his invulnerability now over, we can now kill Baldur once and for all. The next phase has Freya intervening the entire time using Thaumar's giant corpse. This adds a bit extra to the environmental hazards that both the player and Baldur can be hit by if they're not paying enough attention. After a while, Baldur will gain access to his ice attacks and body, meaning he can only be harmed using the blades in this phase. Using the axe will only heal him since, it's the same element. For the next phase, we get knocked into another arena, this time with Baldur having fire attacks. During his final phase, he gains the ability to swap his element at will. His body takes on whatever element he is currently using, making it so that only the other weapon can damage him. This functions similarly to the Grendel fight because the player constantly needs to be swapping through weapons to make sure they aren't healing Baldur by accident. This is by far the hardest portion of this fight because of how fast Baldur attacks and how quickly he can change his element, forcing the player to constantly be aware lest they, start healing him. This is definitely one of the best and most enjoyable fights in the entire game. It ends with an absolutely insane tag team where Kratos and Atreus absolutely put Baldur down. The characters have a moment of peace where they try to convince Baldur to not kill Freya. Unfortunately, Baldur cannot find it in himself to forgive his mother. This ends with Baldur choking Freya, where Kratos finally decides to intervene.
Why do you even care? You could have walked away.
The Sigolians here must be better than this.
Freya says in a lot of not nice words that she will kill Kratos no matter what. She mentions Kratos' past, to which Freya prompts Kratos to tell Atreus the truth.
Listen close. I'm from a land called Sparta. I made a deal with a god that cost me my soul. I killed many who were deserving. And many who were not. I killed my father.
That was your father in hell. Is this what it is to be a god? Is this how it always ends? Sons killing their mothers? Their fathers?
No. We will be the gods we choose to be. Not those who have been. Who I was is not who you will be. We must be better.
Well, guess we're the bad guys now.
In her eyes, yes. But she could never make that choice. We should finish this journey while I still have strength.
The trio leave and go their separate ways, heavy with the consequences of their actions. Now, as good as this ending is, I think there are quite a few writing blunders in this final chapter that really seem kind of off. I have two main issues with the scene: Kratos killing Baldur and his exclamation of his past to Atreus. It seems weird that Kratos pulls out the "we must be better" line directly before snapping Baldur's neck. His previous line about the cycle of children killing their parents makes sense for him to say, But for him to be talking about being better seems really off-putting because he just killed the sun. It's still not being better. Sure, he broke the cycle, but it still resulted in the deaths of one of the parties involved. It's not really an improvement. I get that the parent dying is more significant to Kratos because of his past and him killing Zeus, but it just seems way out of character for him to be personally saying this. I think he should have really just ended with the cycle ends here and then killed him, but I don't exactly know. That's just my problem with it. The next thing is how they play off Kratos' past when he is speaking to Atreus. He mentions that he killed many who were deserving and many who were not, but the main thing they focus on in this scene is Kratos killing his father, not Kratos killing Zeus. Patricide is absolutely not the worst of Kratos' sins, and it's weird that they made it seem like that's what he was keeping from Atreus. I think I know why he tries to nail the idea of not killing your parents in, because obviously Kratos doesn't want Atreus to become like him, and what does Kratos do? He kills his father. So I think that's probably why they focus so much on it, but in reality, he actually barely explains his past to Atreus. He kind of just hints at it and nothing more. I genuinely expected more from the scene and came out really disappointed with the conclusion we got for these characters. We press on and finally make it to the travel room, and select Jotunheim as our destination. We open the doors and proceed up to the stairs, leaving Mir with the dwarves. We make it near the top, where Kratos finally takes off his bandages. He's been adjusting the whole game, fully exposing his scars from Greece for Atreus to see. He has nothing left to hide. Except, of course, the stuff that I mentioned previously, but we're just going to forget that and go with what the game's telling us. Kratos gives Atreus phase ashes, something Kratos has denied every time Atreus has asked previously. As we get further, we realize this is now where the giants fled after Thor massacred their kind in Midgard. But now they're all gone. Even in Jotunheim, the giants did not find their safety. We also pass by a bridge, the very same one that we saw at the end of the Light of Alfheim section. This is what Kratos saw right before Atreus ripped him out, and this will be significant. We find a mural on the wall and get this cutscene.
Wait! Father! Something's happening! It's your axe. It's smaller. Look. She's arguing with a bunch of giants. She knew giants? That's us. The first time we met the world serpent. But how? And our fight with Baldur. But that just happened. Wait. They knew everything that was going to happen. The dragon in the mountain, the stone mason, all these drawings. This is our story.
No. This is your story.
But what does it all mean?
That I was not the only parent with secrets.
You didn't know. She was a giant. I'm a giant. Why didn't she tell us?
She sent us here, knowing we would find this.
But why not just tell us the truth?
Your mother would have had good reasons. Baldur was never sent to find me. He was tracking her all along, not knowing she was only ashes.
If she had a plan for us, I trust it. Whatever it is. Besides, she hasn't been wrong yet. Come on. We're so close to the end now.
Yes. Yes, we are.
Faye has been revealed to be guiding them this entire time, and she knew everything that was going to happen before it actually did. When Atreus leaves, Kratos sees his own prophecy on the wall, his death at Thor's hands. Obviously, this is something he hides from Atreus. We make it up to the peak where we get this absolutely stellar scene.
Father?
No. We do it together. Son. Goodbye, Faye.
I love you, Mom. The Giants. They really are all gone. There's nothing for us here.
We leave, but not before Atreus tells Kratos that all of the murals on the walls refer to Atreus by a different name, Loki. We return to Tyr's temple, officially starting the endgame. I want to pause for 1 second and talk about the ending, because this ending is one of the best I've seen in recent years. The emotional climax is absolutely stellar, and the final reveal sets so much up. The reveal that Faye is in fact Laufey from actual Norse mythology is just so good. A good twist makes the player recontextualize the past events while still leaving room for some interpretation as to what happened. This twist works because everything up until this point is now fully fleshed out and everything kind of clicks. I want to go back to our first interaction with Balder. Remember how I said everything has a double meaning? This is what I meant. His "I thought you'd be bigger" line was referring to Faye because she's, well, a giant. When he was talking about Kratos being far from home, he was referring to Faye being away from Jotunheim. This game's writing, it can just hit absolutely so hard. Even when he's fighting Kratos and is disappointed he can't make him feel anything, it also works because we find out in Ragnarok, Faye was a warrior in her own right, one that could rival Thor and Kratos himself, which is just genuinely insane. I think God of War has one of the best and most satisfying endings to almost any game or piece of media I've ever played. It also is one of the most emotional endings I've ever had the pleasure of playing. I think this game hit me harder than any other game has hit me ever. This, along with Ragnarok and RDR2, are the only games to make me feel such a strong connection to both the story and the characters themselves. This game, as well as its sequel, will always have a special place in my heart because genuinely, I think it changed my life. At the time I was playing this game, I was in an extremely bad place mentally and was kind of just chugging on as I went. I had a lot of stuff going on that made me think I was a terrible person and generally undeserving of anything good coming my way. Now I look back and I don't feel the same way, and I think it's because of this game. Kratos learning to be better and no longer letting his past define him hit me in a way that I can't really describe. Now, God of War didn't fix my problems, not by a long shot, but it did make them much more palatable, allowed me to see in a much clearer way than before. If it hasn't been obvious, I really like this game. Not just for the gameplay, but the absolutely heartbreaking and human story that it tells. Now, the game does have its flaws, such as repetitive boss fights and some iffy writing choices at times, but I think this game more than makes up for it. God of War had to beat out a lot of games at the Game Awards, and I think it was definitely deserving of its win. It had some tough competition. I should know, I played almost all of them that got nominated that year, but I personally think it fully deserves this win. God of War 2018 is not just a game to be played, it's an experience to revel in. Now that is God of War 2018.